The University of Missouri's College of Agriculture, Food and Natural Resources, or CAFNR, is a national leader in agricultural development. Through numerous programs of distinction, their research improves the health of people, animals, environments, and more, shaping the next generation of ag and natural resource leaders and making discoveries that impact not just our country, but the entire world. I'm Rachael Norden, and in this series of Thinking Out Loud, I sat down with the directors of these programs to shine a light on these unsung heroes of agriculture and bring their research to you. In this episode, I chat with Dr. Ron Revord, director of the MU KAFNR of Agroforestry, a preeminent global center contributing to the science and practice underlying agroforestry, which combines trees and shrubs with crops or livestock.
So it might help with trying to contextualize what agroforestry is, because it can combine, trees, crops, livestock. Right there, you have a lot of different configurations you can make of agroforestry. There are several different practices, but one example could be something as simple as silvopasture. So within pasture land where you have livestock, you integrate trees in some way. So that could be for the benefit of animal welfare, so shade, so that you abate like heat stress. It could be for forage stand improvement. So during like the summer season, like we're getting into, sometimes that shade can help for increasing the consistency of forage biomass or even its quality over these hotter months. Or a different type of practice could be alley cropping. So growing trees in rows and growing a crop in between them. Winter wheat's the classic example because the phenology lines up with when wheat's harvested and then, leaf out occurs afterwards. Or, maybe there's a little bit of overlap, but it's inconsequential to wheat yield. So that would be another example of an agroforestry practice. There are several others, but what we do is we study them. So we're primarily composed of research faculty within the center. And we cover a number of different topics by training, and the discipline I work on is applied field breeding. So we do cultivar development of various tree nuts. We also have a very good fruit breeding specialist that works on elderberry within our program. We had Dr. Ranjit Udawada, who was soil and water quality emphasis area that just retired this past year. He was with the center since its establishment in 1998. So he's worked on, the benefits of integrating trees for conservation purposes, cleaning water, as it were, or allowing it to actually penetrate the ground instead of runoff. Riparian buffers are an example of that, like utility. We have Dr. Chung Ho Lin, who works on a number of different things, including the buffer kind of question or phytoremediation with trees, where he can actually take soil contaminants out of the soil, like from formerly mined lands or the like. And he has a really robust metabolomics lab where he studies plants for human health. So looking at the various health-promoting compounds or metabolites within the specialty crops we work with. So those are just a couple examples of the broad swath of diverse kind of research themes within the center that all fall under the umbrella of agroforestry.
Yeah, it does sound like your umbrella covers a lot of different things, but somehow still all talk to each other in that way, which does kind of lead into my next question. And you touched on it just for a moment, so we'll just dig in a little further, that there's these various integrative practices of agroforestry, forest farming, alley cropping, silvopasture, riparian forest buffers, windbreaks, and urban forest, food forests. So some of those I've heard of, and some of them are a bit more elusive. I haven't quite heard of them, things like silvopasture, windbreaks, and such. So could you break down for me those practices, what exactly they are, and how they meet those goals of improving biodiversity and sustainability?
Yeah, so specifically, we talked about silvopasture, so the integration of trees into pasture land, but there's two types. So we talked about that, which is sort of silvopasture by addition, adding trees to pasture land. Then there's the by subtraction, as the kids say. So that's, trying to integrate, like maybe do some timber stand improvement in a forest that might be too dense for in growing forage on the forest understory. But with certain interventions, it's possible to thin it out in a way that could improve timber growth quality, um, but also have enough light penetration for forage on the understory floor where you could actually have some kind of grazing regime integrated. So that's a second example. Windbreaks is um, basically integrating rows of trees, similar to how you would have rows of trees along a riparian buffer to intercept runoff, or whether that's nitrogen-based runoff or runoff that would encourage erosion. You could have a similar like protective buffer that through a windbreak. Wind, especially in really open areas as you'd go further north, um, can be a stressor that's put on crops or livestock. Um, if you have fast-growing timber trees, you could possibly have productive windbreaks that can intercept that wind and prevent like increased evapotranspiration or what have you from the adjacent row crops.
So, just following along this line, agroforestry practices help landowners create multifunctional working landscapes to provide a wide range of benefits, which I feel like we've started discussing a bit. So, this one's a bit of a two-parter. What exactly does multifunctional working landscapes mean, and what are the benefits of them?
Multifunctional is really implying beyond just production. So we're trying to derive other kind of services other than the provisioning services of the crop within a given working land, or you could think about it from a regional perspective as well, whether that's a watershed or larger. Um, and it would be using things like riparian buffers or windbreaks to abate stress on crops or prevent negative impacts of ag from getting off the farm, like intercepting runoff. So those would be some examples. Getting a little bit further into it, you could have other kind of ecological services from that riparian buffer, whether that's for wildlife or pollinizers or the like. And those, when we're bringing on sort of like a dynamic working lands perspective, windbreaks or buffer strips, they don't have to just be for the benefit of their ecological function. They could have an economic benefit sometimes too that's direct from that system, whether that's timber down the road or specialty crops, after a few years after establishment. So it's not just let's do some ecological plantings on the farm here and do all the productivity there. It's a spectrum.
That makes sense. Is there are there any limitations, like, if we're talking about the ecological benefits or economical benefits down the line that you mentioned, are there any like regulations or restrictions around what can be harvested, I guess, for things that were put there intentionally for this landscape?
Yeah, if you're using state or federal support and putting them into like a certain practice, like conservation reserve program, um, there can be limitations to like pulling a crop off while you're under contract. But there are other. But if you're doing it yourself, then no. Or if you're using like the NRCS Equip program, which we've increasingly got support for in the state of Missouri, some of those are very production minded, and they're like cost share programs for establishment.
So moving on here, one goal that I wanted to pick out of your out it is your outreach goal of sharing findings with policymakers and the public. So, just out of curiosity, do you ever do any collaborative work with your Kefner sibling Fapri on those goals to share findings with policymakers?
We haven't to date, but maybe that's something we should do more. Hannah Hemmelgarn, who's our assistant director and has been with the center for about 10 years, has made great strides towards educating federal and state offices and respective service providers, technical service providers of those offices, like the NRCS, with knowledge on agroforestry practices so that they can be sort of included within their standard lists of approved practices and eligible for, typical kind of cost share or other programming. A lot of strides have been made there over the last 5 to 10 years. And a part of our educational programming includes the Agroforestry Academy. So really set towards, it's relevant to growers and future adopters, but it is very like technical assistance provider orientated. And that is basically like a 5-week intensive course on agroforestry, followed with the in-person week that's held every summer. We've typically trained around 50 people a year in that.
Wow. And is that something that, quote unquote, anyone can sign up for, or is there like prerequisites for something like that?
I believe it is an open application process. We have had to increase the enrollment size from 50 to 60 people in the last year because applications have gone up quite a bit.
Of course, as we've discussed, you have a plethora of research and work that you cover in range, but could you spotlight something you're working on right now and what its impacts could be?
So we've had these germplasm repositories of chestnut, eastern black walnut for nut production, northern origin pecan, more recently hazelnut, that stem back to 1998. So they actually started curating those materials with this long-term vision in mind of, tree nut-based agroforestry 2 years before the center started. And now we're getting to this point where we've folded those resources forward, these collections of material that were assembled back then, into assets in a variety of ways. We've made cultivar recommendations to the state for each of the tree nuts. We've built out improvement programs to kind of build on last generation's cultivars. We're now starting to close field gaps that we have in best management practice research. So we can inform growers not just on which cultivar has the most economic opportunity, but how do you weigh cost benefit of management to get the most out of that cultivar within your context. So that, and also that same kind of context, but with other crops around the tree nut cultivar. So we're sort of at this phase where it's, really nice to be in this role because we're starting to realize some of the vision that was established, 30 years ago, and seeing more diverse programming. We're seeing adoption start to increase, every few years in these species. It's an exciting time to try to realize more of a regional tree nut industry in Missouri.
I love the way you put that you get to realize the vision that was established 30 years ago. It's hard to believe 1998 was 30 years ago, or 1996 was 30 years ago. But it really does, with that being said, and with pulling in this new strategic planning vision, that you guys are really stepping into a new era in what you do.
Yeah, and it's wonderful that we are afforded the opportunity to do it, and we have such a good team that has bought into the vision. It's really what it takes. So.
That was Dr. Ron Revord, Director of the Center for Agroforestry at the University of Missouri. If you'd like to learn more about the center or support their work, visit centerforagroforestry.org. I'm Rachael Norden, and you've been listening to Thinking Out Loud from KBIA 91.3 FM.